the Kepler Astrological Research Team, ART, 18 September 2018, and then it's got my email address, gmitchel850@yahoo.com, and I'll be glad to answer questions, listen to suggestions for how to improve the sessions as we go along. I'm hoping that people will find this to be educational. We're planning on doing this the first and third Tuesday of every month, from about 7:30 till about 9 or 9:30 Eastern time. And the agenda has I think, 4 parts to it typically in a given session. We'll talk about research methods. We'll maybe look at an article together. We'll look at research software. And we'll talk about research projects, and tonight we'll talk about what research projects maybe people might be interested in. Maybe you all will have other research projects that you want to bring to the group to share and collaborate on. And then in the future, we'll talk about the progress and the problems people are encountering and that sort of thing. And so try to help to make it a hands-on experience. For research methods tonight, what I wanted to talk about was astronomical versus astrological findings. And it's very common when people first start out that they confuse the two, that they look at something that they think is an astrological finding when it's really astronomical. The idea is this: we have a test proposal. One I want to talk about in a few minutes. It looked at sun signs and found that celebrities are more likely to be born during the day than at night. A beginner's mistake is to confuse astronomical results with astrological results. I've been there. I did it at first. I'm sure most everybody else, when they first start doing astrological research, has had the same experience. If you haven't had that experience, that's great. If you're brand new to doing research, we're going to help you avoid making that simple mistake. As I mentioned, an example is one looks at the percentage of sun signs in a data set. That's an even better example. So you look at the percentage of a database that is Aries versus Taurus versus Gemini. And the naive assumption that one might have is that sun signs are distributed what we call uniformly in the population. And that's just a fancy statistical term for saying that each observation has approximately the same frequency, the same percentage showing up. So we expect to find the same number of Aries, the same number of Taurus, the same number of Gemini. Unfortunately, sun signs are not distributed uniformly when we look at birth data for people. Some signs have larger counts than others. And why is that? Well, the simple reason is that births themselves are not distributed uniformly. Birth rates are higher in some months than they are in others. I've got a graph here that Courtney sent to use as an illustration. This shows the number of births, the birth rates from January all the way over to December. And although underneath it says the birth rates are fairly evenly distributed throughout the year, I would say they're not uniformly distributed throughout the year. They're very clumped up in the summertime. There are a lot more births in the summertime, in June, July, August, September, than there are in December or January or February. Now, sociologists and demographers have explanations for why that is. You might want to look that up sometime. You can easily Google that on the web, birth rates and time of year. There are explanations for it. For us as astrologers, when we look at the data, though, we have to control for the fact that the data is not uniformly distributed. This would look like there's some sort of effect related to astrological sign if we took these birth dates and assigned the actual sun signs, we would come to the conclusion that, you know, there are a lot more people in the summer signs than there are in the winter signs. Courtney has a video that she sent to me. It looks to me, Courtney, like that's Mr. Fernandez from OPA. Is that who that is?
Yes, that's exactly who that is.
Maurice Fernandez? Okay. Yeah, and so it's a brief video. It's about 16, 17 minutes long, and it'll talk about, again, the astrological versus astronomical findings. And it's an interesting video to watch. So let's take a look at that. If there aren't any other, are there questions or comments already, Courtney, before I play the video?
No, we're good.
We're good, okay.
Hope you can see that.
Yeah, I can see it.
Good, good. Okay. Well, I'm Courtney, and I'm the director of Canaveral Research Center, and I produce and coordinate the Kepler conference. So I think right away, I'm a little bit different. I'm in kind of a different niche, and that's always been the case in my practice throughout my life. And I've been an astrologer, you know, since I was a teenager, all my life. And, you know, that's just in this lifetime. We do the Kepler conference. We're going into our third year now. And as you can see, it's dedicated to evidence-based research astrology. And again, you know, that's a little different. And I hope if you're able, you can join us in January. We're at the beach, which helps a lot, because you know that research can get pretty intense. So it's great to be able to be at the beach and let it go like that. But that's what I'm going to be speaking about this evening, is the whole idea of evidence-based astrology, and you know why it's so important and why it's so important right now. Now, I want to actually look at some real simple research and give you some ideas of how we fool ourselves and how to kind of open our minds about that. And I'm going to start with just some of the history of astrological research, because a lot of people early on made a lot of simple mistakes that we need to be aware of. And I'm not trying to pick on anybody or make fun of them for making mistakes, but one of the first astrological researchers was a French guy named Paul Chouinard. And he was a really accomplished astrologer. But he didn't really understand statistics, and he published a lot of research. He was particularly not looking at the astronomical effects, and this is really important. For instance, he attributed great significance to superior people having more rising signs near Virgo and Libra rather than near Pisces and Aries.
What's superior people?
Well, I guess he was looking at eminence. People who had, you know, had high levels of success. I don't want to try to define that. Okay, yeah, no, but that's what that. But the point is, the reason he saw this preponderance of rising signs near Virgo and Libra had nothing to do with astrology. It was an astronomical distribution. It's simply because in the northern hemisphere, we have signs of long ascension and signs of short ascension, and you need to know that coming in, that basically in any sample of data that you've got, you're probably going to have more people with Cancer to Sag rising and less people with Capricorn to Taurus rising. And that has nothing to do with astrology. It's an astronomical distribution. And if you don't know that coming in, you can get really excited about something that you see in a chart that has nothing to do with astrology. And again, we already made these mistakes. We don't need to keep reinventing the wheel.
However, if you see a predominance of the lower rising sign in a certain category, then you do have a point.
That's a really good point. As a matter of fact, you know, Alan Anand just posted this on Facebook today. He was promoting the Kepler conference and he used this. And somebody chimed in the comments and said, you know, in my family, everybody's got Aquarius rising. And I thought, that's very interesting. Because yeah, if you have a data sample and actually most of them have Aquarius or Pisces rising, you really should pursue that, because that's anomalous, and that's worth following up on. But again, we're not picking on Paul Chouinard. He was a pioneer. He did a lot of good work. But again, people have made these mistakes for us. We need to be aware of them. Gauquelin studied Chouinard. And in looking at these mistakes, I want you to try to imagine 1,000 years in the future when astrologers are looking back at us and laughing at how silly we were. Okay, so I'm not trying to put anybody down. I'm just trying to point out that, again, they're stepping stones. Yes, yes, and believe me, they will be laughing at us in the future, and I hope they enjoy it. Now, Gauquelin says, and this is from a piece by Geoffrey Dean. He says, despite the disappointments, Gauquelin acknowledged that Chouinard inspired his application of statistics and applying them to astrology, and Chouinard created these tables of planetary positions that really facilitated Gauquelin's work and made it easier for him to move forward more quickly. So even when people do make mistakes, they're still accomplishing something good. Chouinard is the guy that started collecting birth data from the registry offices in Europe, where they get birth times on the birth form. And that's what inspired Gauquelin as well. So Chouinard did a lot of good as well. Now, I think you've all probably heard of Karl Kraft, who's known as Hitler's astrologer. And that doesn't necessarily mean he was a Nazi, but he did do astrological propaganda for the Nazis, but he was also very interested in research and published quite a bit. Geoffrey Dean and Gauquelin were both very hard on them because his biggest problem was he believed he knew the answers in advance of any research. And this is a big problem. And you're all going to do it. We're all going to do it. That's where the bias comes in. And that, sense of really wanting to believe something. And it can really skew.
Well, this is where astrologers can also see that in scientists. They're looking for the reason to discredit astrology. They are biased towards astrology in the first place, and they will prove, they will try to prove their bias wrong.
Everybody's biased. Everybody is biased. But the wise ones try to be aware. And you're absolutely right. We do have an enemy in this. The skeptics are much better organized than we are. They're much better funded than we are. And they're winning. Okay.
But they make the same mistakes that we talk about in our own field. They are as guilty as everyone, because if they were coming with an open mind and as much as objectivity towards astrology, they would probably think differently.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I keep quoting from Geoffrey Dean. He is the #1 skeptic against astrology, and he's done a lot of damage. Okay, but again, they're better organized than we are, and they're better funded, and I think we would actually do well to learn from them. There's a lot of things that they're doing right, and that's where they're winning. They dominate Wikipedia. They've kept us out of the academy, so there's huge problems in science. There's huge social problems in science. Yeah. There's huge problems in medical research and publishing, and again, it comes down, to bias. So everybody is biased. Now going back to Kraft, again, he had bias, and that was an issue. But here's another problem he had. His genius for error was extraordinary. For example, in a sample of 115 musicians, he attributed great significance to the absence of moon conjunct Uranus in certain signs, even though the slowly moving Uranus could not have been in those signs in the first place. This is a really important idea. Planets are not distributed uniformly, particularly the outer planets. And a lot of people make mistakes with this. Even I've got academic researchers that I work with that have brought me projects in the last year, dealing with Pluto and Capricorn, and I had to point out this is an astronomical effect. Pluto moves so slowly that you can't really derive much from what sign it's in necessarily, all other things being equal. All right, but that's a really common problem. Planets are not distributed uniformly. Okay, now I want to show an example of some research that's out there on the net. And again, I'm not picking on anybody, but this guy was looking at Mars in the charts of public figures. And right away, I'm not happy with that category. Yeah, he's got a big sample. He's got 20,641 public figures in there. But what does public figures mean? I mean, I think at that point you're mixing apples and oranges, and that bothers me. Anyways, he's looking at the Mars distribution in these charts, and this is the graph that he shows. The signs 1 through 12 are arrayed across the bottom. So that's just a typical zodiac. And you've got a definite curve peaking at Leo and Virgo, and then going back down. Okay, now, if you look at this, I want you to think, well, what's the problem with these results? Now, this is what this astrologer wrote about it, and he's got this posted all over the internet. He's saying, Mars for fame. Mars in Leo gives strong vitality and stamina. People with this position are natural leaders. They have a strong need. That's why the Mars is high in Leo. Yeah. On and on. And low in Aries. Yeah, well, look, it's low in Aries and it's low in high. And he's got a whole rationalization for that. It's interesting in that there's a strong assertive placing, but there's always a suggestion of a tendency to burn out and to be constantly changing direction. Oh, the wise astrologer, you know, I'm seeing a sermon in a stone here, because actually all we're really looking at in that graph is the astronomical distribution of Mars. That's all that is. Mars does not have an even distribution, and that's due to its retrograde loops. It spends more time retrograde in certain signs than it does in others. Now, this is from an article that's freely available online by Didier Castille. I strongly recommend you read anything he published. He's got some great articles online. And he just took the French population from the French, you know, whatever their national statistics office is called, and he just shows you the distribution of Mars in the French population. And as you can see, it's high in Virgo, not quite as high in Leo there, but you've got it. This is because of the retrograde loop. It's always going to be higher in this part of the zodiac and depressed in these signs. And there's a very simple explanation for that. And yet, oh, it's low in Aries. See, they dissipate their energy and they're too impulsive and they argue with people too much. No. This is the kind of thing you've got to be really careful with, and it's really easy to fix with control groups. That's what, and we're going to get to that in just a second. He did the same thing with Venus. Here's his Venus distribution for the public figures, and you can see that Venus is high in Aquarius, and then it's high in Virgo, number 6, and then it's high in 4, which is Cancer. You got a little double peak there in Aries and Taurus, but it's very low in like Libra and Leo. And yeah, so that's the Venus distribution. So again, he's like, oh, Venus in Aquarius, that fits very well with astrological thinking. This placing confers an open-minded friendliness and the capacity to attract people, blah, 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 blah. And it's low in Libra, more than any other. That's the sign of marriage and one-to-one relationships. And Venus here indicates someone who's going to channel all their capacity for attraction toward, oh, come on. He's just looking at the astronomical distribution of Venus. Venus, because of its retrograde cycle, actually forms this 5-pointed star pattern around the zodiac over a period of years. So as Didier, and again, this is Didier Castille, almost 1 person out of 2 was born as Venus was transiting 5 specific arcs representing less than 40% of the zodiac. And look, it's Aquarius, it's Virgo, it's Cancer, it's on that Aries-Taurus border, and there's a little spike over here. And that's exactly what he's showing here. This is not an astrological result. And yet this guy is touting this stuff online. I've talked to him. And he's a nice guy. He means well. I've become friends with him. You know, he's like the Paul Schwarzenegger, but these mistakes have already been made. And this is what I mean. You've got a little bit of knowledge and a lot of bias, and you want to be careful, because this is what we call rationalization. He already wants to believe this, and he's got a whole line of reasoning. And, you know, most people listen to him and go, yeah, wow, astrology really works. No. That's not what's going on there. Now, you want to look at some things that have tested out and have worked. this is just a simple graph from a series of experiments that we've done where we compared champion NFL and NBA head coaches with all the NBA and NFL head coaches that never won the championship. And in this case, we used complete data sets. We used all of the guys that had ever coached for either leagues. And we were able to show beyond a shadow of doubt and to tremendous statistical significance that in fact the champions were really high in the earth signs and low in the air signs. This is the tropical zodiac.
In their suns, or?
Here we're using Sun, Mars, and Jupiter, and there are good reasons for that, which I don't want to bore you with right now, but we've done it with all of their planets as well. You get the same effect. Alternatively, the non-champions are low in Earth and very high in air. Now, I want to point out that there's actually a tremendous body of research that demonstrates the reality of the elements of the tropical zodiac like this. And I've got an article that I think is going to be out in September in Correlation. They're working on the issue now, but the stuff's done. They just have to, actually put the issue out. And I've done a research literature review of dozens of studies that have been published, and many of them not even by astrologers, that verify the reality of the elements in the tropical zodiac. There's a lot of market research studies out there that were just done on like sun sign or rising sign to establish people's buying habits and shopping trends that again showed relevance, showed the reality of how these elements function. This is where we're at. We're literally compiling literature reviews now and bringing dozens and dozens of studies together that all show the same kind of. Yeah, I just wanted to add, Saturn has a particular orbital pattern because of its perihelion and aphelion, so it tends to be higher in like Sag and Capricorn and lower in the opposite signs. Jupiter has a distinct pattern again, so it's important to know these things. And also we're doing an experiment on the nakshatras currently, where we've run the planetary distributions for the entire period of the birth data that we're using. And that's just a really good rule of thumb. Look at what your actual planetary distributions are, in that period. It's a good control group. We are getting some comments in. Okay, Russell's saying good points you're making in the video, Courtney. Yeah, thank you. They need to be made. And then Diane, to everyone, how could in your results the top group have over 1,000 and the bottom is less than 400? If you're talking about the coaches, the coaches who've never won championships are much more numerous than the coaches who have won championships, for the obvious reasons, and that actually makes the results stronger because the results are still contra-parallel, shall we say. They're very complementary to each other. And Robin is saying, my parents had 6 kids, 3 in August, 3 in September. So 1 Leo and 5 Virgos. As we got older, we all realized their anniversary was New Year's Eve. I'm doing the math very quickly here. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I remember reading in A Year in Provence, he talked about the fact that all these children were born in late summer. Almost all the children are born in late summer. And it's because of the Mistral winds. And the Mistral winds blow in December and January and February. Nobody wants to go outdoors. And so what does mama and daddy do during those time frames? They keep themselves occupied. And
exactly. All over the world.
Months later, you have all these births. That's why I mentioned that demographers can easily explain the seasonality in birth rates for people.
Yeah, yeah. And it's seasonal. It's Yeah, and Diana's asking a little louder, please. She might be having a little trouble hearing. I can hear you. Yeah, but you can turn it up with your mic a little bit.
No, what happened was I put my mic up over my ears so that it wouldn't, in case I made any sounds while the video was going, it wouldn't be picked up. Now you can probably hear me better.
That makes sense. Okay. All right. And yeah, she's saying much better. Elizabeth's saying much better.
Sorry, Diane. Thank you for reminding me to bring my mic back down.
And now Russell's saying, yes, you can trace some birth surges to patterns of electrical outages, blackouts in certain regions. That's true as well. That will definitely contribute to surges. Another thing you'll notice on that graph, and can you move that back to that graph of the birth patterns? If you look at that graph, and I know it's kind of small here, but if you go to July 4th, if you see that white line, that's the 4th of July. And hardly anybody is born on the 4th of July. Which is really interesting.
Well, as I mentioned to you the other day, Courtney, one of the things that's made a difference in birth times and time of day, particularly for deliveries of babies, is greater incidence of cesarean births. People trying to time the deliveries of their babies. And so it wouldn't surprise me that obstetricians, if somebody was close to having their birth on July the 4th, they might try to arrange it so that they can have their 4th of July off by either inducing birth or cesarean birth.
Right. And, you know, Wendy Stacy has done tremendous work on that whole topic, because it really changes the birth demographics for astrologers, you know, the whole idea of induced labor and designer births. And, you know, Wendy Stacy, she was at the first Kepler conference. She did a number of online sessions for us on that. It's a really fascinating area to explore and very relevant to astrologers in our practice.
Yeah, particularly when we start looking at birth times, time of day, which would be one of the articles that we look at for next week.
Right. And we'll just
day versus night births.
Yeah, that's another really important topic. People are not just born randomly around the clock, you know.
That's right.
There's definite trends there. Now we have a couple of comments here. Maureen saying, yeah, doctors don't work holidays much, especially now that they don't have to, you know, they can really schedule those things. And then Diane is saying Halloween night, everybody is out, therefore no July burst. Well, that's one way to explain it. But also I think there is a holiday effect, you know, people have got better things to do on July 4th than, you know, go into labor. And just like with death, you know, there's certain things that we can consciously or unconsciously control, you know. And Russell is saying they have actually tracked blackouts and birth surges 9 months later in regions. Nothing better to do than make babies. That's truth.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's the same thing, like I say, with the Mistral winds in Provence in France.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we control between astronomical and astrological findings is through the use of control groups. And what we try to do with a control group is we try to use charts for roughly the same dates and locations from a randomly constructed control group. So we try to make random charts that cover the same time frame as the data that we're looking at, covers the same geographic area if we can. Depends on how the control groups are created and what software you use. You have more or less control over those sorts of things. One of the software packages we'll be looking at down the road will be, not even that far down the road, will be Jigsaw. I like using Jigsaw for creating control groups, and it has the possibility of being able to specify not only the date range but also geographic ranges for creating control groups. So that, for example, I can, if I have Americans that I'm looking at for my population, I can limit the area for my control group to the United States' latitude, longitude, sort of coordinates. I can make a square out of it and get most of the continental United States in there. I can even broaden it and get Hawaii and Alaska in there. The control groups are used to allow us to note the difference between the astronomical results and the astrological results. The control group winds up giving us the astronomical results. And what we want to do is we want to look and then see if the astrological results are different from the control group. If they're different enough, then we conclude that the astrological factors that we're looking at have an effect. So, as I just mentioned again, the control group measures the astronomical results, and different enough is measured in a couple of ways. People always, you hear them use the word significant. Is the finding significant? Well, significance has a couple of meanings to a statistician like myself. There's statistical significance, and that measures the likelihood that the difference between the research group, our study group, and the control group is something other than 0. If you take if the difference between the control group and the research group is 0, then there's no effect. If it's different, we still have to make certain that it's different enough that if we took a whole bunch of random samples, not just one control group, but if we took a whole bunch of control groups, what would it look? What would that distribution of values look like, and would the results that we see be different enough? That's statistical significance, but also you have to concern yourself with practical significance. How big a difference is big enough to matter to people? And that one we can't answer with statistics. That one you have to make an argument. And I'm always in favor of making a good argument as opposed to just looking at numbers. I use numbers as evidence, but I don't use them in lieu of a good argument. Now, the question comes up sometimes with control groups, why not use real charts instead of computer-generated charts? And the reason we don't generally use real charts is it's awfully hard. It's hard to find enough astrological twins out there in order to be able to come up with a good control group. If you could come up with enough astrological twins, you could consider using real charts. But that's incredibly difficult to do. It's generally a fool's errand. We can't find them. We don't have the tools to be able to say, okay, go out and match this whole set of charts with another set of charts that are very similar in nature. It makes no practical difference whether we use real charts or we use computer-generated control groups. We get the same result in terms of our analysis. So
Barry's got a really good question here, and it's very relevant to the slide. Barry's asking, one thing I'd like to understand more clearly is the use of control groups versus astronomical demographic calculation of expected values.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the control groups generally give us what the astronomical demographic results look like. They generally give us, you know, for example, if you use Jigsaw to come up with a control group, one of the options you have is to make an ephemeris and just use an ephemeris as your control group. Those are the same as using transits. They're astronomical results. And
then
so,
there's like Bootstrap or shuffling, and Kiosti, starting with Jean Rui, is like the master of that. And we'll be putting some more of his material on control groups onto our website soon. But they do a shuffling method where they take your sample, the actual data that you're experimenting with, and then they shuffle it. They'll shuffle the birth times. They'll shuffle, so they create like a randomization and assign different birth times to different charts or different dates. And so it comes up with a random control group. Then they'll do it like 10,000 times.
Right. Right.
So you get a really thorough analysis of what the expected frequencies are there, and if you
That's right.
and that tends to give you like a conservative effect, and if you can still show an effect after that, then you can be pretty sure that you've got something.
Right. What they're doing is instead of relying on any single one control group, because that's like pulling one observation, one sample of one out of the population. Instead, they're getting a whole sampling distribution. They're by getting a whole bunch of random samples. They're then calculating for each one of the measures that they're looking at. They're calculating the results in the random control group. Shuffling like that is another way of doing it. That's another way of doing it. It's an excellent way of doing it. And we can talk more about shuffling in another session. I didn't come prepared with slides and whatnot to talk about that tonight, but I'm glad you brought that up, Courtney.
Yeah, and we've got some really good material from Kiyoshi on our original website that we really need to transfer and make available, because it's so instructive, and he's had so much success with it too.
Yeah, I see another comment from Barry. The Gauquelin took a lot of care to hand calculate expected frequencies. Yes, he did. Ended up creating tables to simplify calculations before computers. Yes, he did a lot of work that by hand that can be done now, in a matter of minutes with a computer.
It makes you respect him a lot more. He actually did all of that himself, and we have it so much easier nowadays. We have no excuse.
Yeah, there's still some tricks of the trade. There's still a lot of time that we can invest in doing research, but we're freed up. The advantage that we have these days is we can work with much larger study groups, much larger control groups than Michel Gauquelin could conceive of working with.
Yeah.
I mean, not that he used small groups by any stretch. I mean, he used groups that had, a few thousand people in them, several thousand people in them, and he cranked them by hand. Or later on, used the computing resources at the Université de Paris or the Sorbonne.
Yeah, yeah.
I forget where he was at, which one he was at. I think he was at l'Université de Paris, but he could have been at the Sorbonne. But back then, yes, the sizes of the control groups were smaller. The sizes of the study groups were smaller.
And one of the running arguments that he had with the various skeptical organizations that challenged his results was this idea of expected frequencies, because of course he was dealing with sectors of a chart and diurnal motion, and there was a lot of argument back and forth throughout the 60s and the 70s and the 80s as to what was the accurate expected frequencies for planets to be in any given sector.
Right.
And again, we're really fortunate. Most of those arguments have been decided now, and again, we really have no excuse.
Right, but you have to have the control group, because that's constrained for the time that you're looking at, because the distribution of Mars in the Gauquelin sectors will vary over time. Because the orbit of Mars varies over time. We're talking about elliptical orbits. We're not talking about circular orbits, and so we need to have control groups that reflect the time and localities and whatnot as closely as possible as our study group, so that we can control for these astronomical frequencies.
Yeah, and again, I think you're going to get a better idea of what the real frequencies are by generating massive control groups than you will ever do you know, speculating on what kind of sample you should draw from a real population, because there's going to be all kinds of bias and factors you haven't considered going into those real things that are, you know, obliterated when you run the shuffling method and just make thousands and thousands of control groups.
Yeah, I mean, the shuffling method is instead of saying Mars is here for this time period, it's creating a sampling distribution, and so it's saying we have 50,000 observations of where Mars is at a given time, and on average, Mars is in this particular place at this given time. That's what happens when you're doing that shuffling with all those different kinds of samples or control groups. Excuse me. You're getting the whole sampling distribution as opposed to just one single observation. If we think of a sampling distribution, is thinking of instead of looking at it would be looking at a single control group as one observation. We don't like to generalize from one observation. We generally want to go back to our population and get a few more observations, do a few more samples. So the control group, then when Kiyoshi does shuffling, is treating the control group like a sample as well, instead of treating it as a single observation. So for the next, when we meet next time, a research project that I thought was appropriate for us to look at and talk about briefly. People can go out onto this website underneath here, https //astrologyresearch.co.uk/ and then the Capricorn Astrology Research Project with hyphens in between /. Like Courtney, I don't want to bring public ridicule on particular individuals, so I've redacted the name of who did the work here. But the Capricorn Astrology Research Project looked at the sun's position by house in the birth charts of over 20,000 public figures, and the data came from the Astro data bank. And it found that celebrities, that's what's supposedly in the Astro data bank by and large, notables, are significantly more likely to be born in the morning than at any other time of the day. Now, when you read that article, he tries to make what he considers to be a very compelling case. And unfortunately, and we'll talk about it next time, it's entirely astronomical. He doesn't have a control group, and the results that he sees are entirely 100% astronomical. They're not astrological. If you look at the distribution of births around the clock, just births alone, you'll wind up getting an effect similar to what he shows. So here's a question, because when we start talking about doing research together here, it'll help if we wind up using similar software, the same software or similar software. Pegasus Research is made by the same company that makes Sirius and Kepler. It's made by Cosmic Software, David Cochran's software outfit. Pegasus Research is about $175. David tells me that it has most of the research capabilities of Kepler and Sirius, which cost more because they come with more features, not necessarily more research features. They also come with bigger databases. By the time you get to Sirius, you get the Astro data bank included in there with Sirius. But Sirius is a much larger chunk of change. It's like $500. There's Jigsaw, there's SolarFire that can be used for doing some limited research. Alfie Lavoie's Air software, Mastro. Over time, I'll be doing some demos with those, but I'm very curious if people already have research software, and if they do, what software they're using. and I'm watching the chat, and I'm not
All right,
seeing anything.
has anybody got any of these programs? Are you using any of these? Okay,
Maureen
Maureen.
Picasso says that she's using Detective IO for the Mac software.
Hey Mo, I want to ask you a question about that. I'm gonna manually put your mic on here. Let's see.
I've always been curious about the IO software. I've never used it. I'm strictly PC, but I've been tempted to get a Mac just to be able to use IO.
I actually started on IO myself back in the day and switched to SolarFire after that. So what's the IO detective like, Maureen? I've never used that.
It has a limited database. Like I think it was only, I want to say about 3,000 maybe. And it lets you do certain things. It lets you sort, through the database, like all people with, Venus in Aries. And then it'll let you do two, like say everybody with Sun and Venus in Aries or stuff like that. I mean, it's very limited. It's not like what I've seen on Jigsaw or the Cirrus. I mean, it's not quite as good
as
them. But it has limited abilities.
Okay. That's good to know because I never tried that, but yeah, I used to use Mac and use IO all the time back in the 90s. But then I became a SolarFire girl.
Yeah, and SolarFire has a similar feature. I mean, you can do chart search, and you can put in the criteria for your chart searches. That's SolarFire's limitation on research. It can do frequency counts. You can do frequency counts of people who have certain features in their charts.
Okay. Now, Chris actually says here, I'm actually tuning in part to find out more about software. So I think, people need to know more about the different features on the different kinds of software. So we'll keep talking. Now, Russell's saying SolarFire.
We're gonna have demos in the future. Yeah. Starting with our next session, we'll have a demo.
Yeah, well, and we've got lots more material on that. Russell says SolarFire is coming out on Mac in December, which is really interesting to know. And also, Shirley.
Not holding my breath, Russell. They've been dangling a Mac version of SolarFire for the last year.
Really?
Yeah.
And she said she heard on Adam Simmer's podcast, anyone that has bought Windows SolarFire can get the Mac version for free. Oh, well, that's good to know. And then Barry Orr says, working on my own software and relational database now coupled with Excel for statistical stuff. I'm a tortured software developer. Yeah, Barry's a programmer. And so he's doing his own, a relational database. Okay, Barry, we want to talk to you. I hope you're ready for your close-up. Let me find you on the list here, Barry. All right, we're going to unmute you. And now we're going to ask to start your video. We'd like to hear some more about this, if you don't mind sharing with us.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, Barry.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I'm immersed in this project now. I'm kind of I've done astrological software development for a long time. I've worked with Bruce in some of the Mayan astrology, Bruce Schofield in some of the Mayan astrology material, and done some work for Astrolabe and so forth. And one of the things that interests me is looking at the what they call the mundane positions of the planets, things like Purans and things like that. And actually the Gokulan work is of great interest to me. So I had a kind of a rudimentary planetary calculation engine that I was running was used in conjunction with a site called daywave.com, which is basically an experimental Quran delineation framework. So I've taken that and I've taken out some of the planetary routines that I had done. I've replaced them with the Swiss ephemeris routines.
Okay.
And wrap the whole thing in some control features, so I can generate large numbers of charts for over long periods of time very quickly. This is all running on open software and Linux and things like that. So what basically the approach I'm taking is calculating these volumes of charts and loading the data into various relational database tables, which makes the extraction of the data a bit easier just by using what they call SQL, which is a structured query language. So you can pull data out very quickly if you've got it loaded into these tables, and then you can pull out only particular types of positions, for example, local space positions, which are positions on the azimuth and so forth. And also there's a kind of an experimental system of looking at the angular amplitudes of planets that I've been working with for a few years now. So there's basically loading this stuff in, and I'm doing some preliminary work on looking at. I've loaded in the Goklan American data collection, which is something like 1,400 charts into the relational database, and done calculations in a variety of coordinate systems for all those charts, and starting to do the statistical work and getting some very impressive p-values with the Mars in sports champions category, which is kind of cool. But I keep thinking this is all something I'm doing wrong because I can manipulate data, but my statistical prowess is somewhat lacking. So,
well, welcome to the group. You're in the right place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did some things with data shuffling and comparing the Mars to the sports champions to the non-sports champions positions, which are basically in the same time frame. And then later on, I went on and did some shuffling, changing around the month and day, kind of randomizing the month and day assignment control group, which gave also impressive p-values. But so what's confusing me though is I'm looking at, I keep thinking there's a better way or a different way of calculating the expected frequencies, because I'm immersed in Goklan's writing on how he did that. Is really, from what I can tell, and I could be wrong on this because I haven't looked at all the material, but there's a book that he wrote called Written in the Stars. And it's, I don't know whether you've all seen that, but it's actually the appendix to that book describes the methods he used to calculate the expected frequencies, and those yielded the results that he got. And I think those were the methods that were later picked up and validated by the skeptics.
Hey Barry, I don't want to interrupt. Do you have a pair of earbuds or a headset?
Yeah. Yeah,
Are you
I'm using them. Yeah.
Oh, because we're getting a lot of noise for some reason on your mic, which is unfortunate because you're saying some really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe if I hold this up, maybe it's is that any better?
Not
No,
really.
it sounds like almost like a fan or something.
I'm not sure what that could be. I can try a different headset later. It might be.
Yeah, I mean we're really glad to have you, and I think this is a good match, and it's great that you're doing this stuff on your own, because all of these programs that we've listed have their limitations. It's great to be a programmer and to be able to do it a la carte,
Yeah, well, the problem I'm having is the stuff that I'm really interested in isn't available in the commercial packages.
Right. I hear you.
And once you build up a library of these routines, you can reuse all these different parts and tie them all together again to do this stuff. But I'm trying desperately to learn the statistical parts of this now, so I can come at it intelligently. And but the first results look encouraging, and one of the things I'm doing specifically is looking at Goklan type sectors, but they're not the same way he calculated them, but looking at sectors on the horizon as opposed to on the diurnal and nocturnal arcs that he was dealing with. So actually, and that is calculating the expected frequencies there is a little trickier than doing what he was doing, because there's greater variation. There's complete non-uniformity of the planets in the different. If if you take the horizon and divide it up into 36 sectors, you're going to find great differences in the counts of the planets there. So.
Right.
Yeah, that's another important consideration. And yeah, see, Barry's saying it, Russell's saying it might be static feedback on that. But yeah, there's a lot of noise there. So, and we definitely want to hear more from you on that.
I'll disconnect this and I'll try a different mic, but okay. I don't want to hog the session. So.
Yeah, I want to, Russell's got a comment. Well, Maureen says, Maureen's excited because she wants to stay on Mac. She doesn't want to get a PC, and she likes SolarFire, so she's actually excited. She wants them to come out with that version. Russell is saying he's been using David's research tools in Pegasus, and he has a comment that might be better served
on Mike.
So let me bring up Russell, and let's see. Here he is. Okay, unmute. And Russell, I'm sending you a request to start your video. Okay.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah.
Okay, hi research colleagues. I just thought I would take this opportunity at this particular moment to throw out this seed concept. I actually started back a few years ago with David Cochran, myself, SN, Dave Fawcett, and several other organizations that were trying to work with the Astrological Research Collaborative. We kind of threw out there, and one of those, it was a two-prong approach to build a collective database for all researchers to use across multiple platforms, and also the second prong was to use modules to approach like you would use in a WordPress setting, that you would have a research module to plug in and extract and utilize the data according to whatever project you had. And this would save time to a lot of people's issues of collecting data, figuring out how to work with certain systems on their own, and having a lot of the work done beforehand. Just wanted to put that out there that, Essen and I kind of revisited it again a few months ago about this. It's just, unfortunately, we're all very, very, very busy, as individuals. But the engine has been built to start the process. David had volunteered to allow both of his massive sets of data to be assimilated into the project to begin to seed the program. And Essen had built the mechanism to interface with all of this, or he was working on it. So just wanted to know there's other initiatives out there that could solve those people who have limited programming abilities or who may not be able to access databases the same way some of us researchers have been doing this for a while. There's other things out there that could come online if we could formulate a better plan to work collaboratively in research. It would solve some of these software issues as well. So anyway, I just thought I'd take that moment. It seemed opportune to say that. So.
Well, there are software issues. I mean, there is no perfect system out there.
Right,
and again, I think a lot of people, as the one lady or Chris said, they're here to learn more about the different software packages. So we will be covering that over the next couple of weeks. And yeah, there's all kinds of improvements that desperately need to be made over the coming months. And you mentioned Ihsan, he's got a Vedic astrology programs, the Septarishis, that will do some research operations in. He's linked it to the Gokalan data, and I guess the Sirius, the same data bank that's in Sirius. So there's that, and also there's another, I believe, Andrew Foss has some kind of a Vedic research program as well. So those are, if anybody's interested in Vedic research, they're out there.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of research in the Vedic area, I've noticed. But there's a lot of interest to work collaboratively as well. And I think that some people who need access to different types of data, I was working with a Franco, and he was talking about you know, some of the biggest hurdles is to collect the data you're looking for specific targets, you know,
Right.
target groups, and being able to do that in a collective manner might be better served, you know, in a static collaborative project. But anyway, I personally use some of David's Pegasus research, and I've used Jigsaw in the past, and these are all great tools. I think everyone should get on board and start playing with some of this and finding what serves them. But I think eventually it would be good to see a collective database project come online.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things like that in the future. And again, we're in the next session we'll be doing demos. Glenn Mitchell's got a beautiful overview of software programs that he did at the last Kepler conference that we've got a recording of, and we're gonna show that at the next classes as well. And it raises a lot of the questions that you're raising, Russell, of what's lacking, what's needed, what's the future
Right.
with this, you know?
Perfect. Yeah.
I mean, one of the issues that we'll be talking about as we talk about the software, Russell, is just getting your data out of it and moving it between programs, moving it from Pegasus into Jigsaw, for example. You know, you spend a lot of time entering the data in Pegasus. How do you go about getting it out and getting it into Jigsaw?
Right.
You know.
Yeah, that's been a real problem in Sirius, getting it out in a method that you can use in another program. And there were efforts early on to make data transferable among Jigsaw and Sirius and some of the old Matrix programs, but it's that initiative has been kind of outmoded. Gary is asking a question. Has the Astro Databank discussion been done elsewhere? Do we want to have an Astro Databank discussion?
Oh, you mean for like the well, this was called the ARC database, the Astrological Research Collaborative, ARC. We've worked with we spoke with Astro Databank, and you know, there was some a little proprietary, but you know, we worked out some details with them. I think it would be great to have a collaborative research databank discussion. We have a platform online. We've had it on there for a few years. It's kind of stagnant lately, but I think that's something that needs to be revived. Personally, you know, I worked briefly years ago in medical research, using medical records, and you know, they have, of course, much more. They have a lot more resources than we do, but they know how to handle data. They know how to handle categories. They know how to work with we're working with lawyers in lawsuits and things, so they know how to move lots of data fast when needed. So I think looking to other enterprises and industries out there is a way to get some ideas, and there's a lot of astrological minded people out there that are tapped into data collection that we probably haven't tapped into our resources yet to be able to get some direction with. So I would love to have that discussion if Gary wants to sit and have it with us, definitely. So.
Yeah, well, you know, you mentioned, Gary mentions the Astro Databank discussion. One of the issues that I had, I spent time in Sirius 2.0. I haven't gone and revisited that exercise in Sirius 3.0. I pulled all the data out of Sirius 2.0 and went through and to the best of my ability, unduplicated the data on individuals. The problem with the Sirius data, from my perspective, is it's a big glob of data, and it's data on individuals, it's data on corporations, it's data on gold prices, it's data on silver prices, and it's all thrown together in one database. And on top of it, because they're using the Astro Databank data, there's a lot of duplicates. You'll find the same person in there 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. And so I went through till I was bleary-eyed, trying to unduplicate just the individuals.
It's too much for one person, Mitch. It's too much, you know.
But if you're going to rely,
Russell, you haven't seen this guy work. I mean, he's
Oh, okay.
the
Well,
uber
maybe-
Capricorn.
I haven't seen him put his cape on.
So yeah, the very next slide I talk about getting data into and out of software. There is no Rosetta Stone. You have different software supports different import-export formats. Most of the software out there that I've seen supports SolarFire 5 and earlier. They don't support, SolarFire 9, for example. But they use the original SolarFire, what's called chart files, CHT files. They'll also, for some reason, most of them will support Nova chart wheels, which is interesting, given the fact that Nova chart wheels is great for doing Uranian dial work. It's not a research tool, really. And it's interesting that it's kind of a common import-export format, but tends to be supported, the .nov files. There's a matrix format that a lot of software supports, and then there's comma-separated values. The other issue you have is the selection of the desired charts, how you go about selecting the charts you want to export out so that you can focus your data on just the right set of charts. This study that I'm talking about here, and I welcome participation from others on this study, is looking at prison inmate survey data. And so I took survey data from the what's called the ICPSR, the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. And that's their website, https://www.icpsr.umich.edu, and then ICPSR web. The study number, if you want to look it up, when you get to their site, you can get all the details on a particular study by its number. The study number is 6037, and there are 6,572 inmates, male and female, in different prisons, federal prisons. And there's a total of 1,354 variables, so it's a very rich data source. And what I did was I took and pulled out of there, I extracted the date, it includes the date and the place of birth. It does not include the time of birth. So I extracted the data on birth out, and I assigned a random number to each record, an ID number, loaded that as a name, treated the ID number as a name, and loaded the data into Sirius so that I could calculate some astrological variables. Since I'm not I'm not an astrological programmer. I've done a lot of programming over the time. In another lifetime, it was my profession. But I'm not an astrological programmer by any stretch. But I pulled out the astrological variables, the longitude of the planets, etc., and extracted that back out of Sirius, and then loaded the data from Sirius, the astrological data, together with and merged it with the inmate survey data. And then I created thousands of variables in SAS, in addition to what 1,354 variables that came, so that I have the astronomical features that I think will be interested for research. So there's the various aspects between the various planets, for example, are in there. So I can look at sun, moon, squared, or since we're talking about prisoners, and prisoners tend to be sociopaths, one might think in terms of Mars and aspects to Mars. So it's possible to test those out. I created those variables in SAS. I can create additional variables if I need to. So one of the things that people should look at if they go to that site and get that study number, they should look at the code book, because I can use help coming up with hypotheses to test with the data. That's a project that people might be interested in participating on. Some other research projects that come to mind that have been mined before, but where the data is relatively easy to get a hold of. One prospect that I thought was murderers, breaking out for different kinds of murderers, single, serial, mass murderers. The difficulty comes up with getting the birth data for murderers, particularly the mass murderers and serial murderers, but the degree to which we can get timed data on them, that's another possibility. Earthquakes, their time data right to the minute is readily available. And looking at the astrological factors that drive earthquakes is another possibility that I thought of. And then I left it open to other projects, because people here may have, the people that are joining us tonight, our team here, might have projects that they're interested in looking at and sharing with the group and getting collaboration on. So,
okay, we have
I see some.
yeah, we see a comment from Barry. He says a centralized research data. Oh, I think he's going back to the earlier point. A centralized research database, downloadable in a variety of formats, would be nice. Maybe a committee to create a standardized astrological XML or AXML. And you know, I mean,
Yeah, I think he means XAML. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All of this needs to be done, but I don't think it's a volunteer project, you know, myself necessarily.
Well, the interesting thing is that if you get the Astro Databank data from Alois,
yeah,
if you actually get the data directly, it is an XML database.
Yeah, it is, and he's pretty good about giving permission if you ask, if you know,
yes,
accept certain limitations. He worked with us, you know, very generously on the Pop Stars project.
Yeah, Elwha is very willing to share that data. You have to sign a data use agreement with him.
Yeah.
But that's the only formality, and then he shares and he asks also that you share data back with him. You know, he wants it to be a two-way street, not just a one-way street.
But in terms of other projects, I wanted to add that we've got a Vedic astrology project on the nakshatras going with our board that we've undertaken with Isan. He's been, you know, very generous in sharing his Saptarishi's software with us, and Jagdish, who's the earthquake guy.
He's the earthquake guy.
Yeah, and he was in here a minute ago. I'm not sure what happened to him. He seems to be gone now. But he's done some very strenuous analysis on the Nakshatra project. In the Nakshatra project that we're doing, we've undertaken to test the nakshatras, the Indian lunar zodiac, and that in itself has been just a fascinating journey for me, but we're testing it on the Gokulan data, on the professional categories in the Gokulan data. There's quite a number of publications by Indian astrologers on the professions and the job choices that are associated with the different nakshatras. So there's a lot of hypotheses out there. So yeah, we used Isan's Saptarishis to generate the totals, and now Jagdish has got it all in spreadsheets, and we're going to be looking at the nakshatra planets in houses and Gokulan sectors, and even doing some basic aspect analysis on it. So that is also up for grabs, and I'm always doing sports projects. I've got quite a bit of sports data that there's a lot of things that could be done with that. So there are any number of projects to choose from. We'd like to hear from you guys as to what you think you might actually want to work on. And Russell's saying we had cooperation from, I guess, several organizations in a way to self-generate perpetual funding, all on the table. Just had some glitches in timing and energy. Yeah, timing and energy directed motivation is still there. Well, I think the motivation is very powerful, to get improvements, I think, across the board. But again, you need the right team. It's a very serious undertaking. It's hard to, if you look at the way astrological software is developed over the decades, it's been very small groups of really dedicated entrepreneurs. It's and I think that's an important lesson there. But I mean, who knows? Anything's possible. But I want. Oh, we just needed you, Courtney. Needed me to rally around. Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, maybe so. Let's see. We got some things in the works. But again, at this point, I'd like to open it up again to people in the room, because we want to work on actual projects and get people going in those directions. And I want to just say, by way of encouragement, I know listening to Mitch talk about like moving data out of Sirius and what he did on the prisoner data, for Mitch, it's a piece of cake. He can do that stuff in his sleep. But I don't have a science background, and I don't have a math background, and I don't have a programming background. I was a philosophy and religions major when I wasn't playing in my rock band. Okay, that's how I came into astrology. So, I mean, I think for most of the people in astrology are more like me than they are like Mitch. We tend to come from softer liberal arts backgrounds, and we're kind of warm and fuzzy. So that's why I say we're really grateful to have Mitch, and very appreciative. And fortunately, there's guys like Mitch and guys like Barry who really love doing the programming, and that leaves the more astrological work, the softer part of it, to the other astrologers. So I don't want anybody to feel intimidated or like it's over their head, because believe me, I was there, and it's been a learning curve for me. But if you're really passionate about astrology, then you want to learn it. But on something like the Prisoner Data Project, which we've been kind of bouncing back and forth for a couple of months here, Mitch is absolutely right. The hard work to a large extent has been done. What we're looking for is people that can go in and look at some of the previous studies, and there's a lot of them, non-astrological studies, and come up with some hypotheses that we could test. And that's the soft part of research. That's the soft part of research design that is often more suited for the more astrological mind and more astrological way of thinking. But yeah, I want to go ahead.
Oh no, Courtney, I just want to suggest there are lots of ways that people can participate here. We come with varied sets of skills, and there's room for everybody to participate on different projects here. So I have a lot of training in research and methodology, and if I overwhelm people with what I'm saying, just tell me to slow down. Tell me to break it down into English, and I'll try to do my best. As you say, the prisoner data is there. The data is collected. Now it's a function of coming up with hypotheses to test, and testing, and then reporting the results.
And again, that's more of a soft process. Same thing to some extent with the Nakshatra project. If you have any kind of an interest in Indian astrology, we're always looking to do comparative research with Vedic astrologers, and we've got just so many great Vedic astrologers that are working with us now. So there's things that we're doing where, for instance, to hypothesis test, we're working from several different publications, like Dennis Harness's book on the nakshatras, and pulling out what they've said about the professions for the nakshatras, and putting those into a spreadsheet. And that's something that, again, anybody could do. You don't have to be Mitch or Barry to do that. You can just be a normal astrologer, and you can learn a lot in the process, because you're going to be looking at some of the best authors on the nakshatras and reading what they think are the professional attributions for the nakshatras. And that is a a real journey right there. Again, I'm so glad I took on this project, because it's forced me to really learn the nakshatras, and it's been life-changing. Nothing short of life-changing. Somebody else has
We got a comment from Dawn.
Yeah, she's interested in earthquakes, but all the stuff you've been talking about is over my head. Well, don't
We'll
worry.
try to fix that.
Hang in there. Hang in there. I used to feel the same way. And the good news is that Jagdish, who's on our board, and he was in here earlier. I don't know what happened to him. He's in Houston. He is, he's got a long-term earthquake model that he's been working on that's very impressive, and he has a lot of data, and that's something that we definitely want to pursue. And again, I know it's hard at first, and it's easy to get overwhelmed. You want to focus on the big picture and the main principles, and don't let yourself get sidetracked into stuff you don't need to know. That's my secret. You know, I am never going to be Mitch. I am never going to be Kiyosti. I'm never going to be Vincent. I do what I do. And that's what I would tell you, Diane. Focus on what you're really good at and what you're strong in. And don't bother yourself too much about the stuff that you don't need to know. And I guarantee you, over time, you'll get some facility in the stuff that you don't even need to know. I couldn't talk this way about research 5 years ago, okay? But I hung in there, all right? And that's what I want to encourage all of you to do. I know it's tough. I know it's a learning curve, believe me. But hang in there and stay with it, and focus on what you're good at. And even though it seems new now and it seems like it's going over your head, 3 or 4 or 5 months now, it's going to seem repetitive, and you've heard it all before. I promise you.
Very good points, Courtney. Very good points. When you mentioned hypothesis a moment ago, I'll rather than speak of it like a statistician, a hypothesis is a guess. It's an educated guess as to what we expect to find, and we draw those out of sometimes deductive logic, but often reading the literature, reading articles. You know, if you're gonna look at murderers, serial killers, and mass murderers and whatnot, you've got to read some literature on the psychology of murderers in order and also be familiar with research that others have done, like Ruiz and others, and we'll talk about some of those articles in correlation and whatnot over time. That have looked at murderers. You know, where all the projects that I've mentioned, except for the prisoner data, is soil that somebody else has already tilled. There's already been research papers that have been written, so there's already ready-made hypotheses. To what I like to do is good research, science is incremental. We make small changes we make small incremental changes. So we read what somebody else used as a model in the literature, and then we say, okay, this is what affected this is what we see on the prisoner data, for example, the survey data of prisoners, and we say, what happens then if we apply some astronomical factors to it? What happens if we apply the aspects to Mars, for example? So we're building on foundation that's already been laid.
Yeah, that's really important. And there is a foundation out there. And, you know, like I was saying with the studies on the elements, there's a tremendous foundation there. And most astrologers don't even know about it, because I think I'm the first person to put it all together in one place. And we need to be thinking like that. Maybe you can't do statistics, but maybe you know how to use Google. And you can find 5 or 6 studies that are indicative of something and pull them all together in one place for the first time. That's actually really important. That's
helpful.
Yeah.
That's helpful. You know, when we start talking about gathering data, some projects we're going to have to gather data for. You know, earthquakes, for example, then you're talking about using a spreadsheet in order to enter the data. Somebody's got to volunteer to get that data into a form that we can, at least into a spreadsheet, and then once it's in a spreadsheet, it can be manipulated from there so that we can load it into Sirius, or we can load it into Jigsaw, or wherever we're going to load it into.
I think the most important research skill is actually data entry. You know, if you have the kind of constitution that allows you to sit at a computer for hours at a time and repetitively enter data, we love you. We need you. You are gold, because I'm so tired of doing it. Okay, yeah, so it's even simple stuff like that that can really help a lot. Gary is asking, what about studies on genius, Einstein's, and there's a bit of a foundation there. I know the Gators were doing something on Mensa members, which I don't think they're quite in the same category as Einstein and Newton. But there's, you know, a little foundation in IQ studies, and also Nick Collerstrom's famous study about the Eureka effect of when they had their famous discoveries. That's out there. So yeah, I think that's relevant. And see, that's something that could fit within a body of research on intelligence studies, IQ studies, extreme genius studies. So there's a little bit of a foundation there. And Diana's saying that I can do. Data entry? Can you do data entry? We love you. We love you. You're going to be the most popular person in the class. Yeah. Oh, my poor hands can rest. Well, okay. I think we covered quite a bit tonight. Mitch, is there anything else you want to bring onto the floor before we let these good people go?
No, we covered what I had on the PowerPoint presentation. I think for next time, I think one of the things that we're going to want to do is have a software walkthrough on one of the pieces of software. Yeah. So maybe we put it up for a vote here real quick, or you know, people can.
They all seem to be asking for that. And again, we've got a good video that Mitch did where he really does this wonderful overview and comparative analysis of the different systems that will open your eyes and really make you think. So I think we can show that.
But we can throw it up into the group real quick as to which software we look at first.
What do you think? Any suggestions? You know, we didn't even talk about Vincent's Mastro. We could probably get Vincent, we could get Vincent in here to demonstrate it for us, I'm sure. He'd be thrilled. He'd love to do that. Any favorites? Okay, we're David Cochran's. Okay, we've got Sirius. I've got Sirius. You've got Sirius and Pegasus, right?
I have Sirius. I don't have Pegasus. I don't have Kepler. I had an email conversation with David Cochran just 2 days ago about the differences between Sirius, Kepler, and Pegasus, and he does not have a list of the differences between them. He told me that Pegasus research is pretty similar to Sirius in terms of the research capabilities. It doesn't have the data. It doesn't have a database, or at least not much of one. He said that's what most people start out with if they're interested in doing research. Is they start out with Pegasus. Now, the advantage of working with Pegasus is being able to share data with Kepler or Sirius.
And he's just introduced Pegasus. So I mean, I go back. I bought Sirius back in 2014, I think. You know, and we're getting requests for Sirius. A couple of people have it, and that's like that's a big research program. It's got a lot of features, so we can start there, and you know, Mitch can give you a good rundown on it. So let's plan on doing that the next time, and then
we'll do Sirius. Sirius, it may take us a couple of times to show because it's so feature rich. Yeah. I don't want to overwhelm people with a whole hour on Sirius necessarily.
Well, now Chris is asking, can I provide the link to that video? We'll show it in the next class. You know, especially the overview part.
Yeah,
we'll show that.
Yeah, we'll show it.
You know, like we did the video tonight. It's good. and Prashant is saying hi. He can't hear me. I think it's your speakers, Prashant. Okay. And think about, again, start thinking about, you know, what kind of projects you want to work on, what you think you can do, what you think your skills are. you know, what you think you can bring to it.
Yeah, some of the people who are online tonight are my fellow students with David Cochran. They're studying vibrational astrology. We can also do research in vibrational astrology as well. So there's all sorts of research opportunities, different projects that people can be engaged in. And for that, Sirius is the tool they'll want to use for doing vibrational astrology,
Right.
because David has built all sorts of features into Sirius
Right.
for working with it, for doing vibrational astrology.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah, next time we'll do Sirius.
And as long as you're not trying to get your data out into another program, you're
Well, it depends, because I got data into Sirius and got data out of Sirius for the Prisoners Project, because that's where I got all of the astrological data from, was
Mhm.
Sirius. So I was able to load data in and get it out. When I loaded it in, I gave it a specific category to fall into, and I was able to get it out by that category.
by the category. Really?
Yeah.
As astrological data that would go into like solar fire?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Okay, we'll have to
It
put
came out as a if I remember correctly, it came out as a spreadsheet, as a comma separated values spreadsheet.
Okay. Okay. Well, good. Any other comments or questions or requests before we go? Thank you, Maureen. You're the best. It's great to see you again. And this has been I think a good kickoff. We're looking forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. Barry saying, Mitch, thanks for sharing your expertise. Hope you don't mind if I contact you with statistical questions.
Glad to have it.
All right.
Feel
And
free.
Elizabeth says, fascinating introduction. Well, thank you all so much for coming in from all over the world. And we look forward to seeing you back here in 2 weeks, and we'll keep you posted on our upcoming class schedule and on all the things we have in store for the Kepler conference. So we'll see you back here in 2 weeks, okay?